Okay, so what I wanted to do tonight was the last video I think I put out, well, apart from some of the feature videos, this is where all your videos are, videos.xlights.org. So the last one that I did that was version based was way back in April, which was up to 2017.7. So we're now up to 2017.13. So I guess I just wanted to fill the gap in and go over that stuff. Now, there's a couple of things I'll spend less time on because there's other videos that have gone into it in more detail, but I will touch on all the relevant items. So this is a cut down version of the release file. I've cut out a lot of the bug fixes and the like. There's only a couple of bug fixes I've left in here because they were somewhat interesting. So let's start at the bottom and we'll work our way up. So the first one here, timing event pulse and timing event jump to the VU meter effects. Actually, I'm going to create a new sequence based on a song. Desktop. Where's my Christmas music? It's not all Christmas music, but I don't know. Don't Stop the Santa Man will do. So what I've added here in the VU meter is a couple of new types down here. So I've sorted the list because it wasn't great. But I've added some timing event. In fact, I didn't really need music here, but timing event jump 100. So what this lets you do, and I hope the volume here is not going to be too great. Let's xLights. Let's bring it way down. So if I go in here and play this, and yeah, we'll put some timing marks in. All right. So if I set this to timing event jump 200, I've set it to the timing track, which is this particular timing track. And now if I play this, when it hits one of these timing marks, what it does is it jumps to the top and then it falls away. How fast it falls away is controlled by this. So if I want it to fall away slower, I increase the number of bars if I remember rightly. And of course now it's gone past it. Yeah, so you basically get a timing event jump. So if you want it to pulse on the beat and you don't want to rely on interpretation of the music, this is a great way to make sure that it goes off at exactly the right point in time. The other one, the timing event jump, the difference between this and the jump 100 is the jump 100 always jumps to the top of your model, fills it all in and then falls away. The timing event jump actually jumps to, we'll not do this, participants. The timing event jump actually jumps to whatever the intensity of the music is at the time it hits the timing mark. So how far it jumps will vary according to the loudness of the music, but it will only jump when it hits the timing mark. So I think they're the two ones that I added there. Yeah, timing event jump 100 and timing. Oh, and timing event pulse. So timing event pulse is similar. Yeah. Did that render? I'll quickly render it. Oh, it's still in timing event jump. That's why timing event pulse. Okay, so what that does is it pulses on and then fades to black. Again, looking at the bars setting here to work out how quickly it should fade. So as I extend this out, when it, I'll jump back again, sorry. So you can see how long it fades now, and that's because I extended the bars out. So, and again, the colors and controllable. So it's currently red and white. And so jumps to white. It's just white. I wanted it red. So hopefully that's fairly straightforward. It's just a couple of new modes. I just find sometimes that VU Meter doesn't do a great job of discerning particular beats and the like in busy music, and the timing event can be quite useful there. Candle. So Candle is this one up here. It's a new effect. To be honest, it's kind of like a color wash, except it behaves like a candle in terms of it flickers on and off. There's a bunch of options here that let you control exactly how it flickers, play with them. You pump the agility up, and I think it changes more quickly. So you can see it's fading in and out a lot faster. The wind baseline is the baseline, sorry, the wind baseline I think is where it starts. The wind variability makes a big difference to how quickly it does big jumps, or how quickly it does it. So I think it's, I can never remember which one it is. But basically these things let you control exactly what the flicker looks like. I don't, so if you want to change the color, you can't actually change the color with these, but what you can do is something that's been there for a while, and that's you can play with the hue. So if you want the candle to be bluish, you just shift the hue around. That was a lot easier than playing with the colors up here. But so yeah, so you can still control it. So that's the candle effect. It applies as one single candle across the whole model. If you've got a string of elements like a single line and you want each pixel to act as a candle, you effectively either need to make each pixel its own model or drop the effect at the node level. I haven't actually implemented it so that it can flicker each one individually. It's one of those things that's, you know, I've thought about and I may go back and do. The only challenge with it is there's a whole bunch of state that I have to keep for each one of them because you want them to look slightly different. So if you drop this on your whole house will flicker as if it's a single candle, which is probably not what you want. A direction setting for the lightning effect. To be honest, this appeared to be a bug in my opinion. By default, the lightning effect appears to come from the bottom. When it first starts, if I click at the first start, it leaps up from the bottom, which is an extremely weird thing to do. And so Chris has added the up and down so that it behaves more like you'd expect lightning to behave. So that's all that one is. And excessive rendering on pasting effects. To be honest, there's been a number of changes over a number of releases, not just in 8.8, to try and optimize how we render. To be honest, we suspect that we still have some problems and you will still need to click render all. It's possibly a little better than it was. It used to over render massively. There was lots of things that just were rendering over and over again when you did a copy and paste and things like that. A lot of that has been optimized away, which means it does less work, which means it stays more up to date with you. But there are a couple of scenarios where it's not actually rendering at the moment, and there'll be further releases coming in 14, which will address some of those situations. And hopefully you'll find that it renders more quickly on the fly when you're cutting and pasting, dropping, moving effects and things like that. But it's also, so it's doing it much quicker and it's doing it much more reliably, and hopefully that'll mean less time clicking on render all and waiting for it to finish. So that was 8. Obviously, there was nothing interesting in 9. I think you'll find 9 was a whole bunch of fixes. In fact, releases between 9 and 11, there were a massive amount of bug fixes and crash fixes. We've been doing a lot of analysis of the crash logs and trying to find the problems. And that's resulted in a massive increase in stability over the last few releases. SubModel Generation, I touched on this in a video the other day. Basically what SubModel Generation lets you do is when you come over here and you click on a model, and to be honest, it really doesn't matter what sort of model it is, you can come down to submodels. And historically, Submodels were one of those things where you would add them and you'd have to go and either put in a whole bunch of ranges, or you could go into the sub buffer and you would highlight a section. So we can do that. So you would either come into here and say 1 to 1000, that's it, or instead you'd go to the sub buffer and you'd bring it in and you'd highlight a section and say, yeah, that's my submodel, and it's all good. The problem is and one of the things as part of the importing process is not everyone's display is the same, and it's become quite popular for people to import sequence like Logan's, which he republished this week. But obviously, Lilia and a whole bunch of other people sell their sequences and allow you to import them. But importing a sequence can be quite challenging. Sean's got a lot of models on his house, and if you don't have as many models, it can be quite difficult to import those sequences in and get something that looks really good. And one way to address that problem is to take your existing models and start to break them down into submodels, which you can then load effects onto. So here I've got a matrix. This matrix happens to be 50 high by 100 wide. But what happens if I wanted to break it up into 10 smaller models, which I could then use to sequence with? So now we've added this generate button, and you go in and you give it a name. So we're going to call it, I don't know, horizontal. That'll be the base name. It's going to be a horizontal subbuffer, and I want 10 of them going across the model. And so what it does is it comes in here and it generates them. So there's number 1, there's number 2, there's number 3. They won't overlap, so they'll all be independent. And then, Sean might have had, 10 snowflakes, and I decide to map whatever the effect was on that snowflake to each one of those submodels. And like I say, it lets you get quite effective. Now, there are a couple of modes here. So that's horizontal. There's another vertical one which does the same thing but does it in vertical slice. But there's also a nodes one. And so the nodes one lets you say, well, I want to break it up into, I don't know, let's make it really awkward, 53. And so what it will do is it will create 53 submodels, right? Each one equal in length that make up that many nodes. Now, this doesn't make a lot of sense on a matrix model, but, on a single line, maybe. On a single line, I could come in, generate it, say, I want nodes, and I want 3 of them. And so it will create me 3 submodels covering that single line. So a very powerful way to generate your submodels if that's the sort of requirement that you have. Obviously, it's not going to help you if you're trying to submodel a snowflake or something like that. That's still going to be a fairly heavy manual activity, but definitely useful if you're importing something like Lilia's sequence or something like that. The xLights controller configuration upload. So basically, thanks to Stuart, he sent me down a xLights 16 long range, and so I added the ability 192.168.0.1. I'll send it to my router. That's a good place to put it. So basically, if you've got a controller here, and this is a xLights, I can come here, upload to the controller the output definition to a xLights 16. And what that will do is it will upload all of the definitions of all of the universes that it should listen to, and all of the string mappings to the output ports on that xLights 16. Now, just like the Falcon controller, that requires me to come in here and fill in this controller connection field with something like WS2811 :1 to say, well, that's, sorry, :1. So say that's output port 1 using WS2811 bulbs on my xLights 16. And so now when I come back here, and if this was that particular one, and in this case it actually isn't, but I could do that upload to controller xLights 16. It will send the data across. No longer necessary to use the assistant application And obviously the PixLight 16 doesn't have a web page, so this is a much easier way to configure it. I mean, you'll still need to use the assistant from time to time, but it will definitely upload that configuration to your controller and save you a bunch of time. Now, I don't actually have the controller plugged in, so I can't actually demo that part of it. The XModel export of star models. It used to be that exporting models really only made sense for things like custom models and the like. But as we've added submodels, it's become increasingly useful to be able to share an XModel file of other elements, which include all of the submodels underneath it. And all this one means is that now if you've got a star, you can export it as an xLights model, which will include all of the submodels that you happen to find on the star into an XModel file, like that. Oh, we'll do that again. Let's put it back in the folder that we should be in. Put it there. And then I can come up here and import it, drag out the size that I want the star to be, grab the star model, and it brings it in. And if that had submodels, this model here, or this instance here, would also have all of those submodels on it. So again, since the beginning of the year, we've done that to the tree, we've done that to the matrix, and we have also done it to the DMX as well. So if someone sets up a Skulltronic skull and gets all of the configuration right, you can now export that Skulltronic skull as a definition XModel file and share it with another user. Same if you've got a particular model of moving head, you manage to get it all perfectly configured, you can share that configuration for that moving headlight to someone else who happens to have the same model and brand. So that's that one. Add settings to exclude audio from package sequences. So if you're someone who's sharing a sequence and you're using the tools option to package a sequence, and there's two packages here. There's a package log files and a package sequence. So let me talk about the difference between them, because a lot of people get confused by this. The package log files really just sends us, well, it sends us the currently open sequence, the networks file, the RGBFX file, and puts it into a zip file, and it also grabs the log file. So if you click on view log, it displays the log. Well, it'll throw that all into a zip file. What it doesn't do is package all your images, your video, your audio, or any of that sort of stuff. So for some types of troubleshooting, package log files gives us everything that we need to reproduce a problem that you might be experiencing. However, it doesn't let us play your sequence. It only gives us the bare bones. And most problems that we experience, that's enough. But if you're wanting to share your sequence, if we need to see exactly how something renders and we need the image files or the audio files or the underlying video files, this package sequence item down here is the thing that really does that. It pulls everything together, no matter where it is on your PC. It finds all the things that you'll reference, brings them all together into a zip file, and also guarantees that that zip file is in the best possible shape for someone else to pick it up and reuse it. And you've seen that in the last few days when Logan reshared all of his files using this package sequence. Everything that you could possibly want to use to load up Logan's sequence was included in the package sequence file. All the references were corrected. And as long as you followed the instructions in the video, and I'm not going to go back through them again, and do that in the right order, really listen carefully to the instructions. If you follow those instructions, it's actually a real breeze to bring something like this in. A lot easier than the old way that they were shared, where people used to manually try to pull everything together. And through that process, they often broke the linkages to image files and the like, and you had to go in and manually fix all of those things up. Package sequence is really great for that sort of stuff. The downside of package sequence is if you're in the business of selling your sequences, or even if you're planning to publish your sequence on a website somewhere, you probably don't want to include the audio file. The Record Industry Association takes a fairly dim view of that. And so there's now a setting up here that says, when I do package a sequence, strip the audio file out of it. Now, it still references the audio file, so when the user who's trying to load that sequence at a later date tries to open the sequence, they'll get an error saying, hey, I can't find this audio file, and they'll be prompted to go and find it on their own machine. But it won't include the audio file in the zip file. The exclude presets option, again, designed for people that are sharing their sequences, but if they happen to have a library of presets and they don't really want to share their presets because presets are saved inside that RGB effects file, well, by selecting this option, what the package sequence will do is it will actually strip all those presets out before it creates the package sequence file. And so, yeah, it basically protects the intellectual property of those people who are choosing to try and make a little cash on the side from sharing sequences and the like. So that's two options. The DMX model parameter control the displayed beam length. So this relates here to the DMX model. And basically, Gil's been busy at work doing a couple of things. He's been addressing some of the problems that existed since he originally added the Skulltronics. There was a few things that he hadn't quite completed, and he was going back and fixing those up. But yeah, he's also added some additional parameters here that let you control things like how far the beam stretches across the model. Not necessarily hugely interesting when you're looking at it from the top, but when it's in 3D mode, and in reality, the light doesn't quite reach that far across the house, you can shorten it down with the beam display length and make it more realistically proportioned to how far that light reaches on your house. He also added the pan and tilt settings here. Particularly the slew limit and the tilt slew limit. So these things are settings which enable you to force this model to behave more like your light does in real time. The reality is if I want to in xLights, I can tell the beam to go from here over to the other side instantaneously. One frame, 50 milliseconds later, the light's pointing over here. Of course, in practice, that's not how these lights work. That it takes time to move, and the pan and slew limit, which are in degrees per second, basically allows you to limit how fast that model moves, which once again generates a much more realistic representation and lets you fine-tune your sequence with a realistic understanding of how that moving light is going to actually work in practice. So hopefully that's enough. I guess I'll be in Vegas next week for the xLights conference, and one of the things that I'm most looking forward to is an opportunity to have Gil walk through all of the DMX models and effects, etc., to really understand how they work. The other thing that came out in 10 was we finally got the 64-bit version of xLights on Windows released. There's been a few problems in the first couple of releases, but given that xLights already runs as a 64-bit on both Macintosh or OS X and Linux, they haven't been huge, but there has been a couple of problems which have been addressed. We also have moved xSchedule to 64-bit. Sean has made sure that the icons are quite distinct, because it's actually quite simple to install both a 32-bit and a 64-bit version on a machine at the same time. So for those who are a little bit unsure about whether 64-bit's stable, you can run both and switch between them at any time. There is absolutely zero difference in the files that sit behind it. So if you create something in 64-bit, you can absolutely open it up in 32-bit and vice versa. The only time it becomes a problem is if you create a very large sequence. There is memory limitations in the 32-bit version, and if you create a sequence that crosses that limit, you will have problems and you won't be able to load into the 32-bit after you've created it in the 64-bit. You may get a crash, but there's a log message which tells us exactly what you did. So yeah, that happens. save and recall buffer timing and color panel reset settings. So I think it was just before Christmas we introduced this. So xLights for most of last year, as you moved from effect to effect, basically it would keep the settings. So let me just turn those three options off for now. So if I came in here and put a color wash on here, right, and I put a fade in time of, I don't know, 2 seconds. So it fades in and then it color washes. Okay, and if I came up here and put a fire effect on, same thing. It fades in over 2 seconds. This setting remains. And that was, to be honest, a cause of a lot of pain. You know, often what would happen is you'd drop 10 or 15 effects and then suddenly you'd realize, well, hang on a second, that's not what I expected. And you'd have to go back and reset all of these. And so just before Christmas, we toyed with changing that behavior so that it basically, as long as you kept dropping the same effect, it would hold on to the settings. But as soon as you switch to another effect, it would reset all the settings back to their defaults with the exception of the color panel. The problem is, of course, there are some times when you don't want it to lose the settings. And so we introduced this checkbox here, which basically, when it's not set like this, it behaves old school. Nothing changes as you move from effect to effect. When you set it, however, and I come up here and I drop a pinwheel down, it has resetted the fade setting back to 0. Okay, and that's because that checkbox is set. Now, if I was to now change that to 1 second, and I was to come back up to pinwheel and drop another pinwheel, it would still be 1 second. But if I came up and grabbed whatever that is, it's now reset it back to 0. So that's a shimmer. So yeah, so you now have control. It's set on each panel, so you get to choose by panel. On the color panel, it only impacts the bottom half. The top half, the colors themselves, will always remain sticky. But you have the shortcut here where you can save and re-access your color palettes at any time via the drop down, which I'm sure you all knew. So that's what that's all about. 2012, all right, so picking up again on the Vamp plugins. So basically the Vamp plugins are not included in the actual xLights download. You do need to go back to the xLights download page, access it via the downloads link here, and you'll find that there are the plugins for the 32-bit version and the 64-bit version. If you download them and install them, you need to get the version right. You can install both. It's quite harmless. And they'll install on your machine. I'll show you in a second how to test that the 64-bit's working. If the 64-bit doesn't work, then clicking on this Microsoft Visual C++ redistributable and installing that will typically fix the problem that we have getting the 64-bit version running. One of the challenges we had with these Vamp plugins is there is actually no publicly available 64-bit version of them, and so we've had to round up all the underlying source code and dependencies, etc., and build them ourselves. They're not perfect. We had some challenges getting them to build, and consequently, while they are fully functional, they do run slower than the 32-bit versions, and that is something we will come back to. But given most people only run that once or twice for any given song, I don't think it's the end of the world. To determine whether the Vamp plugins have installed correctly, create a new sequence, go to the sequence settings on the settings menu, go to the timings tab, click on new. And if this drop down here is nice and wide like this and got lots and lots of items in it, then the Vamp plugins have all been installed correctly. They behave exactly like they do in the 32-bit version. If it didn't install correctly, you'll just have these first 4 items. If you're running a different frame rate, these first 2 might be slightly different. And you'll have metronome and empty, and that's all you will have. And you'll need to go back and typically, if you've installed the right ones, you'll just have to go back and install this redistributable. And once done, everything should work fine. Look, if the absolutely worst things happen, you can, of course, always go back to the 32-bit version, generate your timing marks, insert them into your sequence, and then switch back to the 64-bit version, and of course the timing marks would all be there. So if it absolutely doesn't work under any circumstances, A, let us know, and B, you can always go back to the 32-bit version to do the same thing. So hopefully we can move on now. It won't crash on me anymore. Okay, the importing of presets. So one thing I noticed, so everyone is aware of effect presets. It's basically like a clipboard for storing effects. And you know, typically you would come over here and you would highlight, you typically have several layers. So we'll insert a layer below. And this is not for any great purpose, but you'd have some things, and you might have many layers, and then, sorry, I'll unselect that. And then you'd come in here and you'd highlight these things and say, actually, I pretty like that effect. That's pretty good. And then you come over here and say, give it a name, call it Fred. And it would create a preset called Fred. And then, actually, that didn't work. I don't think that worked correctly. Hang on, I think I should have gone back. Sorry, I think I should have left the timing marks on. Sorry. Right. So, sorry, if I grab these, I go and create a new preset. That's better. I can tell it's right because it's got the 2 there. And then I can come over to here, select an area, apply the preset, and it will basically, if I hadn't got all those effects there, now let's free some space up. So again, I can come back here, apply the preset, and it will basically paste that thing in. These presets, as I said earlier, are stored in your RGB effects file, so they remain available to you pretty much forever. Which is pretty powerful. Now, what you can do is you can export these presets into an XPreset file, and there are some people out there that will sell you a set of presets. Now, you can click on a single preset and export it, and you know, this is GT top preset, and that's fine. But you can also export it at a group level or even at the top level here, like that. And if I was to then add a group, I can come down to this group and I can import it, and it will bring in all of those effects again, basically. So that's how you share presets and you import them. Now notice, because I exported at this level here, it included all the things underneath it. Well, sometimes, we'll add another group here. So this enhancement basically lets you come down here and import, and instead of just selecting one of these presets, you can select multiple, because some people are selling their presets with them all packaged in individual files, which may not be what you want. Generally speaking, it would be better to put all the presets you want into a group and export the group rather than exporting as individual presets. But yeah, so it's just there to make it easier to import people who package them that way. This one here I'm not going to demo, but I do want to talk about. So in 2013, I introduced, in 2017.13, I introduced a change to the LoRa protocol. xLights has run the LoRa protocol for pretty much since release 1. The downside of it is xLights has got a reputation for not running the LoRa protocol very well. It gets slow, particularly at any sort of reasonable number of channels, and I've heard that number of channels as low as 48, but also I've heard people run it slightly higher. I've been doing a bit of research. I've looked at the Falcon Pi Player code, and it would seem that the Falcon Pi Player adopts a strategy where it looks at each frame, and if the LoRa channel has not changed from the previous frame, it doesn't send it. And that's interesting, because the LoRa protocol pretty much every channel is sent as 6 bytes. And so every time I can drop a channel from being sent, I significantly reduce the amount of data that's going out on the line. Now, it's a bit of a speculative change because, to be honest, I don't have an LOR controller. And so I've made the change. I've put a post out on Facebook. I'm hoping that one or more of our interested users who are running LOR protocols will try it out and will come back and give us some feedback about whether this really makes a difference. I may come back and make another change. At the moment, it basically only sends the data when the channel changes. And I'm thinking that that might not be wise and that maybe every second or so I should send the data either way, just in case you plug the controller in after the sequence has started and you turned it off at the beginning and you left it off through the whole thing, and things like that might be a problem. So anyway, it's a bit of a speculative change. I'm calling on the community to have a look at their LOR controllers and tell me if it works. The LOR CCR Level Import. So what this is all about is if you're doing an import of an LMS sequence, do I have... I could have sworn I had an LMS sequence folder here. Yeah, this one here. Actually, no, I won't go up. Sorry, there was an individual. This one here. All right. Sorry, it's take a little while. LOR sequences are extremely large and it takes a little while to load them for import. Now, for those that have never seen an LOR import, it literally produces hundreds, if not thousands of rows where every single node is represented by the node itself and then the underlying colors of the individual pixels, which is absolutely crazy. Now, if these are just standard 16 channel AC type controllers, this is very manageable. There's only 16, 20, 24, 96, whatever it is, and it's reasonably manageable. But in this case, these are CCBs and CCRs, and so you end up with this ludicrous number of channels. And so there's long been this feature called Map CCR strand, which, as best I can tell, has actually been broken for a long time. But now I've fixed it, and now what you can do is you can click on it, and what it does is it basically rolls it up to that strand level, and you can then come in and map that strand at the strand level on your model, or etc. And interestingly, so this is matrix strand 1, when I import it and I go down to it, you can see it actually brings the effects in at the node level, but you only had to map it at the strand level, which makes a massive difference if you're trying to bring across and not use a data layer, but actually bring all the effects into xLights for your LOR users. So anyway, it's there. Again, a little bit speculative. I think it's right. If it's not right, some users need to speak up and let me know where it's wrong. Okay, source size on the liquid effect. This is something I meant to build at the first instance, and the liquid effect was a bit of an adventure, and it's obviously a very impressive effect. One of the challenges, though, with the liquid effect has always been that it's effectively a point source. And so when you're pumping out lots of particles, they all collide with one another and fan out. It's like when you've almost turned the garden hose off and the water sprays out really widely. Well, that's exactly the effect you get. And if you want to stop that, basically what you end up having to do is reduce the flow down really, really low in order to get something that looks like it's a tap. But what I've added in this release is basically something that lets you get rid of it as a point source and spread it out. And so now you can have something that's more like a fire hose or something like that. This lets you then go and increase the flow and potentially change the velocity. And if you were to move that around, make that 180 degrees, move it right over to the right, bring it halfway down. You can see it now looks like a hose spraying water in, and you can make the source size larger. And so you don't get that spread out as much. It looks more like it's a hose. I'll make it really slow. So yeah, a very different effect just by changing the size of the source, and allows you to generate yet more effects with liquid. I'm still excited to see what people can do. All right. Display channels. Display model end channel in layout tab is similar in format to the start channel. So yeah, this one's interesting as well. So look, generally, obviously, if you're using absolute, you know, here it starts on channel 1, ends on channel 15,000. It's a lot, but you know, I've spoken many times before about, you know, using start formats like universe and start channel. That's interesting. I know why it happened. I'll fix that one. Sorry, we'll go back and start again. That happened because I think universe 1 didn't exist. No, let's start again. All right. Starting universe 1, let's create 16 universes of unicast. All right. We'll save that. Okay, now where were we? Oh, we were talking about start channels. Okay. So yeah, so when it's absolute, starts at 1, ends at 15,000. But if I go in and say, no, actually it's universe. Okay. That definitely shouldn't have happened. Oops. Oops. I thought I knew what was going on there. All right. We will try it one more time. We're going to delete that. We're going to add a lot more universes. All right. We're going to save it. All right. Is it going to crash this time? I hope not. Okay, we're going to set it to #1:1, which it didn't. Okay, so it didn't crash. But notice now what it does is, first of all, it not only shows #1:1, it shows what that absolute channel is, so you no longer have to click up here and wait for the tooltip to appear to find out what the absolute channel is. But it also shows you the end channel, both in terms of the old absolute number, but also in terms of the same format that the input's in. So because we use the #universe:channel, it's telling me that this ends on universe 113, channel 210. If I was to switch that to output 1, channel 1, it does the same thing, except this time it's output 30, channel 210. So it's a great way of, you know, if you're used to working in one format, you can now see it in the same format. It's a lot easier to follow. So that's what that one's all about. Fix out of order universe handling in the Falcon controller upload. So we talked earlier about the xLights. And if these here were all on a Falcon controller and I went in and uploaded to the controller the output definition and the input definition for the Falcon controller, it would all work perfect, and we demonstrated that prior to Christmas. And the reason it works perfectly is because these universes are in order. But if that universe 9 was actually up here instead, and I'd attempted to upload both the input and output configurations of the Falcon controller, there was actually a defect, which led to it actually not mapping it correctly, because the Falcon controller actually resorts these by universe number. And so we've now made a change which takes into account for that. Again, I'm not going to demonstrate it. My Falcon controller is not plugged in. Okay, reworking the xLights, LOR, and Vixen import mapping dialog to do drag and drop. Now, I did an entire video on this. I don't plan to go back and demonstrate it again. You saw it a little bit just a few seconds ago when I did the LMS import. But there's a video I've published within the last week that goes through this, demonstrating the import of Logan sequences. Pretty much Logan sequence does pretty much everything, including strand level mapping and everything else. So pretty much everything you could want is there. The only things that I might add, actually, there is one or two things I would add. Sorry, we'll do an import. Do I want to do that one? Let's go back to our folder. I don't have any saved. Oh, no, I don't have any saved ones there. Does Barry have one? No. There we go. This will do. All right. It's not a very good demonstration, but you can click on the header on this column here, and it will sort the models both ascending and descending. So that's the only thing that I think is probably not been covered many times before. The next one is the drag and drop of the display elements. So let's throw a few additional display elements in here. Really doesn't matter what they are. And if we come back to the sequencer, we can go to the display elements screen. And here you get a list over here of all of the models or timing tracks, etc., that have not been included in this particular sequence. We're looking here at the master view. If you want to add them in, you can just drag and drop them across. You can also click on them and click the right arrow, and over here you can click them and click the left arrow and it will move back. There's also these buttons here which will move them backwards and forwards. Down here you can drag and drop them to sort them. The timing can't be sorted, it always stays at the top. You can do multiple select, so you can grab those two and drag it down and drop it and we'll bring them together. You can also select them like that and move them up and it will move them all around. I've seen a couple of reports of some defects here that we'll fix, but generally speaking it's pretty good. All of that was demoed in a video last week, I think it was. What I didn't demonstrate is that there's actually a right-click menu here. Actually, first of all, you can add new views up here just by clicking add. You can also clone them, so you can create a copy of a view. So if you've got one that's pretty similar to what you want, you can clone it and it creates a new copy of it. And you can also rename them up here. When you're down here, like I say, there is this right-click menu. There is actually an undo. If I was to drag the single line up to there, I can right-click here and undo it, and it will undo my actions, and that is a stack of undos. So if I'd done multiple things, I could undo them one at a time. There is no keyboard shortcut for that. I couldn't get it working. There is the hide all and the show all, which just works on these eyeballs. A really cool feature, I don't know about you, but when I sequenced several years ago, you know, I just basically had all my models here and I threw sequences, I threw my effects on it, etc. But there were a whole bunch of things here that I left which I didn't actually put any elements on, but they still remain in my sequences, and consequently my sequences have lots and lots of rows. So one of the things I've added here is the ability to go in and say, either hide all the unused elements, which will leave them inside the master list, but, oh, sorry. But it will hide it so that you don't see them here in this particular view. And you can also do the remove unused, which will go through and remove anything that's unused. Unfortunately, it's going to remove the timing track, which is not a wonderful outcome. I probably shouldn't have done that. So I'll have to add one in up here. All right. Okay. So, so yeah, but that's a really cool way to clean up a sequence and get rid of all the rows that you're not using in that sequence. The other one is a select all if you want to just select everything, but there's also a bunch of sorts here. So if you wanted to, at the moment they're basically sorted alphabetically. let's go and grab all of these and drag them in. So we can sort them by name, and so we'll put them in alphabetical order, and obviously it sorts it here in alphabetical order as well. We can also sort it by name, but keep the groups at the top. So if there were groups here, the groups would be sorted at the top. When you just sort by name, the groups appear wherever in the list that they would appear based on a name sort. There's also a sort by type. I don't have multiple elements of the same type, but this will group all your single lines together, all your matrices together, all your trees together, and so forth. Sorting models under this group, I'll come back to that one because I need to go back to the other screen to set it up, and I'll do that one as well. So let's go back to the layout tab. Let's add a group up here. Test. And let's throw a couple of models in it. Okay. Oh. That's interesting. Okay, so there's our test. So we put our test in. The bubble to the top of the groups will bubble all the groups up to the top of the list, but not change their order. So they'll remain in the same sort order that they appear in the list. If you select one of the actual groups, you can say models under this group, and what it will do is it will find all the models that belong to that group and it will bring them up so they appear immediately under the group. And some people find that as a really easy way to sequence things that are related close together. Obviously, you need to be careful. If it appears in multiple groups and you try that multiple times, it will keep moving it to wherever you tried to move it to last. So some interesting functionality in that, which I didn't demo in the previous video. Okay, we're pretty good here. Reverse order for submodel ranges. Yeah, this is an interesting one. So we've talked about submodels here. And sometimes in submodels, when you're adding a submodel here and you're adding a range, sometimes, you know, you want to do 1 to 100. Which will create a submodel which puts the data this way. But if you're zigzagging the data back, when you add the row, the next row, you may not actually want to go from 1 to 100. You may not want to do 101 to 200, because that's going to generate a model where it's as if the data is always increasing from this side, and that doesn't. You'll see what I mean. If you drop an effect on it, it will generate a slightly different result. So if I add a second submodel here, and I add the same channel ranges, but this time I add 1 to 100 and 200 to 101, i.e. I reverse the order of them, we actually get a slightly different effect. So if I come over here to my matrix, and here are my two models, and let's put a bars on it. And let's do it going to the right. So that's one model going to the right. And here's the other model going to the right. So you can see how in this one, the bars effect seems to come up to here and then come back again. Whereas in this one, they're both going in the same direction. And the reason for that is because in one of these models, I reversed the channel order in the range in the submodel. So if you've got a matrix which is zigzagging its way up and you want to create submodels which kind of reverse the zigzag, this is one way to do it. Play with it. You'll get it after a while. Two new effect alignment options. So basically, Gil's added some additional alignment options here. I think it's these bottom ones, shift and align the end times, basically shifts the end times but keeps the sequence, the effects the same. Whereas if I just align the start times, it shortens the effect and makes sure it's the same length. So some slightly different alignment options there. It was not incredibly obvious there, but if I select all of these things And if I press shift and hold it down so that I've now selected it, it may not be incredibly obvious in the video, but this is a darker color than these two. And so when I do my alignment, it's going to align to the middle effect because that's the one that was selected. Gil also has introduced this color manager. So if that reference effect and effect selected was not obvious enough, we can make the color difference a bit more obvious. So now they're orange and purple. So yeah, this this color manager that Gil's introduced basically lets you control a whole bunch of the colors here. So these are your timing tracks. This is the order. So as you add 5 of them, it will loop through to, when you add the 6, it will go back to the beginning, but these are the colors in the order that they will appear in. And then there's a whole bunch of things relating to timing tracks and Papagayo tracks and all those sorts of things that you can change or reset to the defaults. So that's the color manager stuff there. Value curves on the Galaxy effect. You'd already be, by now I'm sure, very familiar with value curves. Well, Gil's gone to town and introduced a whole bunch of new value curves here, which just like every other effect we have, basically gives you a huge number of additional options and things that you can do. I'm not going to go into them. You've seen value curves many times before, and you can play with that the way you always have. Allow box models to be sized past the window boundary. Gil's got this down as an enhancement. I guess it's also a defect in that when you had, what does it mean? Well, basically it means is if I'd taken, click on the background here and let me reduce the size of my screen. So what used to happen is if I had a model like this window frame here and I had taken it beyond the edge here of the screen, there is a circumstance where it would basically snap down and suddenly become smaller. And that was because the model had been dragged off the edge of the recognized screen. And so Gil's fixed that so that that doesn't happen. Custom model import will now keep submodels in the original order. Look, basically, you know, we've seen the submodel dialog. When you did an import of a custom model, or in fact that star that we saw earlier, why is that? Because we're in the wrong folder. When it brought the submodels in, there are no submodels on this star, but if there were submodels on the star, they would be defined in a certain order, and for some reason, well, we know why, but basically they were being brought back in the reverse order of which they existed in the original star. And so Gil's gone in and fixed that so that they now come back in exactly the same order, and that can be important at times. Add a right click to correct the aspect ratio of a model. So we click on this and correct the aspect ratio. We'll basically make sure that all of the pixels are equally spaced. So because this is 100 pixels wide by 50 pixels high, it makes sure that it's in that 2:1 ratio of format and not stretched artificially. So you get a guaranteed aspect ratio that's consistent with that matrix. It only applies on the matrix model. We've seen the color manager and the output of status messages in the command line. So I'm not sure how many people are familiar with render mode. There was a post, quite some time ago that Sean put together. And basically, so basically you can actually run xLights in a batch mode, which is what this does. So basically, ignore this bit at the front. So basically this is running xLights from the command line where it's saying xLights with this /r and then the name of the XML file. In this case, that's passed in as a parameter. And what this does is it actually fires xLights up, loads up this particular sequence file, renders it, saves it, including the FSCQ file, and then closes xLights. And the beauty of this, in an appropriate script, if you make a minor change to your setup, maybe you remove an element or add a pixel or remove a pixel or something like that, which generates a change in your FSCQ, and so you upload that to your Pi player or whatever, and now you've got a problem. All of your FSCQs are all based around the old setup rather than the new setup. Well, what this option here does is basically allows you to batch re-render all of your sequences rather than having to go in manually one at a time, open them up, render them, save them, open the next one, etc. You can just put it into a batch script. And in fact, I've even got it here where it does also FTPs it up to my Falcon Pi player when it's done as well. Which basically means when I make those changes, I just fire the job off and forget it. And, 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, my Pi player is all up to date with the latest sequence files ready to go. But the change that Chris made was basically when it runs in this mode, he's made it so that it actually writes messages out as it goes, so you can see what it's doing and where it's up to and all that sort of stuff. The same status messages that would normally appear down here in the status bar get written out as it renders. So that brings us up to date. That's 2017.13. So it's now May the 10th, or it was May the 10th when this came out. And we're only 13 releases into the year. We've got a long way to go if we're going to catch up to the 56 releases that came out last year. I hope some of those enhancements or changes at least are helpful to some of you. And I guess we'll be back in a few releases time for another bit of a version update. So thanks a lot, guys.
My